Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we'll be breaking down some top redraft targets and fades with an emphasis on guys we have ranked much higher than their present ADP and truly just guys that we've been drafting throughout the offseason. I mean, whether it's best ball, dynasty, redraft, we've had more than several long months to go through these players. These are the guys that we've been targeting and ending up on our rosters most often that we consider values, or guys we're just completely fading because we do not trust them at all. And yes, I'm saying we because it's not just me today. Very excited to have on a fellow PFF worker of mine. You also might know him from his work at Establish a Run, maybe even the Fantasy Football Hustle. Dwain McFarland. Dwain, how's it going, man?
Man, I'm doing great, Ian. Love getting on the show. Happy to talk football. Values, fades, and I like the way you put it. Who are the guys we've actually been drafting? Because you will hear a lot of shows where people talk a lot about people, but I want to know where the convictions are.
Exactly, man. It's easy to put together the rankings list, but, at the end of the day, who are you coming away with? I get some crap on Twitter sometimes where people go, oh, it seems like you like everyone, man. And look, it is hard to say bad things about these professional athletes sometimes. I mean, everyone in the NFL is amazing.
Exactly.
And a million times better at football than you, me, or any of the listeners out there will ever be. So, every time we say someone sucks, take that with a grain of salt. And I think we do, but yes,
yeah.
So today, again, the guys we've been coming away with. And Dwain, I'm going to let you start with one of your top values, a certain running back that plays for the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Cam Akers. And again, I like him as the player, but really what I like is, the situation, right? He's going to a backfield that's got Malcolm Brown. It's got Darrell Henderson. Now Henderson, was a decently high draft pick last year, but both have never done anything. And so, if you look at the history of second round running backs, when they've landed in a true wide open situation, which is what I would call that backfield, 55% of the time, the new player coming in has been able to win that. Now, again, look, there's a lot of noise potentially in that data, but at the end of the day, the flip side to that is the cost. I love Jonathan Taylor. Everybody does, right? He's a better player than Cam Akers, but he lands in a backfield where you've got Marlon Mack, who's had 1,000 yards rushing 2 seasons in a row. Yes, he's in a better offense. Yes, he has a better offensive line. But at the same time, everything really comes down to touches. So if I've got to take Jonathan Taylor in the third, and heck, how high is that going to go, right? With all of the the videos running around. I was kind of thinking, hey, maybe without preseason, we won't have these guys blow up. Oh no, now it's just about videos and preseason, or in a training camp. But so when I compare that, right, to a Jonathan Taylor, when I look at a guy like Cam Akers and you can get him in the 5th or 6th round, he's a great part of your strategy. We'll talk about our fades in a minute, but that also fits into this as I look at that range of players. And I'm always looking for upside, Ian. I want a solid floor, but I want upside, but I want it at the right price. I don't want to pay a 2nd or 3rd round pick to get my upside, but if I can get it in the 5th round, I love it. And it just gives you a chance as a drafter, because to me this year, and every year is different, you really want to come in most formats, you want to come away with 3 running backs in your first 5 to 6 picks. So this gives you some flexibility on how you go about it. You don't have to go running back, and maybe take somebody you don't like in the 3rd round. Instead, you can skip a few, grab a couple receivers, and you come back to a guy like Akers, and you still get the upside. You got the Rams offense, which we know can be good. Down the stretch last year, they were much better when they went to more 12 personnel. Got old Johnny Munt on the field there. It was just a better offense whenever they decided to go heavier on the running game, and they changed things up after Brandin Cooks got hurt, which, hey, now Brandin Cooks is gone. So those are the things that excite me about Akers.
Even though Akers doesn't have Jonathan Taylor's just tree trunk legs, or A.J. Dillon for that matter, the guy was stunting a pretty swaggy visor in practice the other day. So I want people to keep that in mind. But yeah, man, I agree with everything you said. There is a bunch of upside here. And even just, looking at the Rams more specifically than historical draft picks and some of that things. Sean McVay is a guy that uses a featured back. He's coached 52 games with the Rams, including the playoffs. His RB1 has played 60% or more snaps in 48 of those games. And even the non-qualified games were like 50% plus. There's just never been a situation where he hasn't been leaning on one back. It's usually been Gurley, but we saw C.J. Anderson step in that role. Even last year when Gurley was out, we saw Malcolm Brown really step in that 1 week and beat his feature back. I know we've seen the offseason coach speak about McVay saying, oh, we're happy to have 4 of these guys, but man, it's one of these things where, okay, slightly step back in the Rams offense last year, still the 11th ranked scoring unit. And history tells us he's going to lean on one guy out of, Henderson, Brown, Akers, even, our John Kelly truthers of the world. It seems like Akers is the most well-suited, most well-rounded to take that bell cow role if anyone's going to get it.
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing I would say, a great, thing you bring up there on the quotes from McVay. When I read those and I went back and read them, you probably do the same thing, Ian. Like I see these things pop up and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I want to be open to it. And I go read it. And I'm like, man, I've read this thing 5 times. And the main thing that I'm seeing here is he says that he's willing to use a committee, but if one guy steps up and takes over, then he's going to go with it. And so that's the other side of that comment. So you just always got to make sure you go back and read the whole thing, versus sometimes the blurbs that get shared with us, through, and I get it. That's the way Twitter works, right? Everything's a blurb.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's what we got to take the offseason coach speak and try to find the situations where that matches the coach's past tendencies and what we've seen. And that's going to take me to my value because I do think we have that situation going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going to read a quote from Mike Tomlin earlier this offseason. I'm a featured runner type guy by mentality. No question in today's game. A featured runner needs to be supplemented by guys who are capable of doing similar things in case he misses time. Usually when it's going well, it's because you have a lead dog out front and that guy is a featured runner. James Conner is a featured guy and proven runner when healthy. We're excited about him getting back to health and displaying that in 2020. That's a lot of fluff. That's a lot of saying we want to run with one guy. But what do we know about Mike Tomlin and Steelers? He uses one guy every season up until last year, and that was just more because of injuries than anything. I mean, from 2014 to 2018, we had Le'Veon Bell, D'Angelo Williams, Connor, Jalen Samuels, even Stephon Ridley. These guys averaged at least 17 touches per start whenever they were given the rock. There was never a situation where the Steelers starting running back was being supplemented by even like a scat back. It's always just been a 3-down guy in Pittsburgh. And unfortunately, last season, we didn't see that because Connor had these injury concerns. And, that didn't mean he wasn't producing. This was the PPR RB9 in weeks 1 through 8 last season. And, for every injury concern with James Conner, I think that's already being baked into his price. It's a reason why he's not being drafted among the top 20 running backs in a lot of these drafts. And, something you mentioned before, you want to get out of these top 5 rounds, usually with 3 running backs. I'm not asking you to take James Conner in the top 12 or 13, but I cannot think of a better runner with a better chance at this featured role in this, round 4-5 range than James Conner.
Yeah, we're totally on the same page. I actually wrote about Connor as one of my values in an article at PFF, and you hit it on the head. What I like about what you just did there is you talked about what were the quotes from Tomlin, and then actually going back and looking, well, has he actually backed that up? And so when those two things come together, that's typically what I'm looking for. So with some coaches, I'm going to value what they say much more than others, because some coaches are always fluff. Like Bill Belichick today, you heard the thing probably, kind of a news item here. Somebody directly asked him, would you be willing to rotate quarterbacks? Belichick's answer was, well, I'm always willing to do what's best for my team. Belichick didn't voluntarily come out and say, hey, we may be starting 2 quarterbacks. Now, he's done it in the past, to be fair. If you go back to his days in Cleveland, he did a little bit of that, but that's going way, way, way back. But as far as, Connor goes, man, I'm with you. I'm pretty much taking him, in mid and high stakes drafts. I'm taking him in the 3rd round. I bet I've drafted him in half of my 3rd rounds. This past weekend I did it. This past weekend I had the 3-hole and the FFPC Football Guys Player Championship twice in the weekend. First time I went Zeke, Connor, and then I went DJ Moore. The next time I went Zeke, and DeAndre Hopkins fell to that spot. So it's hard to get Hopkins there, and I'm not as afraid of Hopkins as others. But then Connor came back in the 3rd, and I took him. So it's to your point. He fits perfectly to that strategy with Akers. I like Akers as my RB3. So if I can come away, especially if I'm drafting in that top 6 or 7, if I come away with a Zeke or a Barkley, and then I can come back in the 3rd round, right there around that turn, and I get Connor. And then I can come back and get Akers in the 5th, man, I feel pretty good, about my 3 backs, and I can just pound those receivers and tight ends.
It's one of those things where if the worst thing you can say about a guy is, okay, he's going to get hurt, just be positive this guy is going to get hurt, because if we could turn injuries off for this season, James Conner would be a consensus top 10 pick in fantasy drafts of all shapes and sizes. So don't be afraid to get that upside when the upside is that big and it's not costing you a top 2-round pick to do so. Now, moving on to your next value, it's another guy where, I'm seeing the analysis a lot of times just stop that he's going to get hurt. And I'm talking about Brandin Cooks, Deshaun Watson's new potential wide receiver 1.
Yeah, and even if he's not the wide receiver one, right? I just stay really excited about, Brandin Cooks, because what he's really able to do, from a standpoint of working the field vertically, is just a better fit with Deshaun Watson. That's not something that Jared Goff actually did very well. And if you look at the number of times that Deshaun Watson goes deep, from a percentage standpoint versus Goff, it was like 16% versus like 11% last year. The year before, it was a smaller edge, but it was still there. But when you look at the accuracy, and again, you got to be careful with accuracy samples over 20 yards. But when you have multiple years like you do with Deshaun Watson, it's superior to Jared Goff. So, and then if you pair that with Brandin Cooks, if you look at him over the last 5 years, nobody in the NFL has had more, targets where he had more than 2 yards of separation, which at PFF is qualified as open, meaning, hey, get me the ball so I can take off and score. And so that excites me about, Brandin Cooks. Like Will Fuller, I think every week he's healthy is going to, obviously he has wide receiver one upside and you're going to feel great. But we also have to factor in that with Will Fuller, this is, for me, it's even a little bit different than, James Conner. James Conner's kind of had some weird, freaky things that have happened to him. But Fuller, it's the constant, soft tissue type stuff, right? It's just kind of over and over. And I'm not saying don't draft Will Fuller. I draft both of these guys and don't worry about it, because Fuller can win you all 12 weeks he starts. He could literally win all your games for you. So Fuller's still in play. But what I like about, Cooks is he may not be very far behind him. Yes, he's going to have to get into sync with Watson. So I do have him slightly behind him on a per game average. But if he picks things up, and then all of a sudden, if you got a few games where Fuller's out and he becomes the focal point of the offense, that's just, added on top. And a lot of it, again, it's like what you've talked about on Twitter. We don't hate any players or just love some players more than, others. I mean, sometimes we may, but it's all about the ADP. And Brandin Cooks right now is just getting overlooked. So if I come away with those three backs on the top 5 rounds, Cook's usually there in the 8th round, and it's just easy. It's just, he's a guy that I look at and I'm like, yeah, he's had the concussions, but really, I mean, he's missed 2 games in the last 3 years, I believe. I don't have it pulled up in front of me, Ian, but I want to say it's right at that. So it's not like, this is something where, he's been knocked out of, games over and over and over. Now he has had multiple concussions, so we're going to have to watch out for that. But yes, Brandin Cooks is a guy that I'm definitely all over, especially in the 8th round.
Yeah, man, you actually were underselling it. He's only missed 2 games in the last 5 seasons. And yeah, the concussions are absolutely concerning. But again, you're using a round 8 pick on the guy. You're not going to look back at your fantasy team in December and go, wow, if I hadn't have gotten that 8-round pick on Brandin Cooks, things would really be looking different. Like, this is the point in the draft where you should be going nothing but upside, because his range of outcomes is so much higher than, most other wide receivers being drafted in that range. And look, DeAndre Hopkins is the man. He is so good, but so is Deshaun Watson, and he's not going to stop being good just because Hopkins is gone. I mean, among all QBs to ever start at least 16 games, Watson is 4th in completion rate, 8th in touchdown rate, 6th in adjusted yards per attempt, 5th in overall passer rating. And that's not even mentioning the types of things he can do off script and with his legs. I mean, truly one of the top 5 talents I think we have in this league, with or without Hopkins. We kind of joke on Twitter a little bit about how this Texans offense could resemble, just 4 verts every play with the guys they got out there at wide receiver. Maybe that's what Watson needs to just even be better than he has been, because as great as Hopkins was, how many games did we see over the years where Fuller was hurt and, Hopkins is playing injured, or just getting the whole defense to focus on him? And we're getting Kiki Kuti and these random guys getting 15 targets per game. I mean, DeAndre Carter was getting fantasy consideration at different points over the last 2 years. Now we have actual, at a minimum, above average NFL wide receivers in this offense. And I'm with you, man. It doesn't need to be Fuller or Cooks. It can be Fuller and Cooks. And I'll tell you what, even Randall Cobb at the end of the drafts,
yep.
There are worse ways to spend draft picks than on this Texans offense.
Man, that's a great bonus one. I know we're just doing 2 here, but Randall Cobb, you can get him in the 15th, 16th, 17th round. Now I know a lot of drafts don't go that deep, but, a lot of the ones I do are 20-round drafts. Man, I literally have him. I'd have to go look at my latest percentages, but I want to say he's on like 65% of my team, because I'm just like, that's just easy. It's easy money. I mean, he had 800 yards last year. They could potentially run, a lot more 11 this year. And then when you factor in, if for some reason Fuller's out, there could be those weeks where he gets more of a funnel situation. And the other thing is, I just think that when I look at the Texans, they run a ton of 12 personnel, but I kind of wonder, did they just do that because they had to? I know Bill O'Brien came from the Patriots, and, he used to have Gronk and Aaron Hernandez in one of his seasons there as the offensive coordinator, but he's he may not be the best coach in the world, but he knows that Jordan Akins and freaking, Daniel Fells. I mean, is that really the best way, to optimize your offense? I think we'll see a lot more 11.
Yeah, I like that call. I mean, Randall Cobb is literally just discount Jamison Crowder. He's going to get the targets. You're not going to feel good about picking him. Your friends might laugh at you, but, we'll see who's laughing, in week 16 when the guy beats his ADP by a good 30 spots. So another guy that I'm really interested in, like Cobb, he's pretty much free. You can get him at the end of almost any draft, and that's Jets tight end Chris Herndon. And, maybe some of these quotes from the last week are going to change this, but I've been attacking Herndon all off season just because everyone is still so bummed about last year that we have an extremely talented tight end going outside the top 20 players at his position. And, here is the quote from Adam Gase to, just put this idea more into context. Talking about Herndon, he's our starting tight end. It's rare to have a guy with the ability to be as effective as a pass catcher and a guy that's explosive when he gets the ball in his hands and still be an on-the-line tight end that can block in the run game and also pass protect. Chris does give you something that you just don't see a lot with all tight ends across the league, where you can say, I can leave him in protection and feel comfortable. Adam Gase doesn't say nice things about anyone, and he's going out of his way to praise Herndon. And he should, because there's nothing that Herndon has done on the field to lead us to believe is anything other than a great tight end. Last year, suspended, pulls his hamstring running routes on air. He just couldn't get out there. But it's not like Ryan Griffin blew away the world. We've had, beat reporters all offseason knowing that the Jets are excited to get Herndon involved. Now the head ball coach is saying it himself. Could not ask for just a more depleted, receiving core to go after. I mean, I think any reasonable person should be putting Herndon 2, maybe 3 at the worst in this offense to projected targets. And I mean, it really wouldn't be the craziest thing if Herndon is one of the very few tight ends in the league that goes ahead and leads his entire team in targets. And, I talked about that talent, and just to put that in a little more context, these are the only rookie tight ends to average at least 8 yards per target since 2000. Mark Andrews, Gronk, Hunter Henry, Heath Miller, Aaron Hernandez, Noah Fant, Jordan Reed, Zach Ertz, George Kittle, and Chris Herndon. The guy's a stud. The workload's going to be there. And again, man, he's free. Like, okay, if you have Kittle, Kelsey, or Andrews, I get it. You're not really taking another tight end probably at all, but I see no reason why you can't be having Chris Herndon on your team as either your, one or worst case, your backup tight end.
Yeah, man, I love the call. And I think, the other thing is with Mims getting off to a slow start, right? He's injured. They're basically just trying to dial up any receiver they can find, to bring in to actually just take practice reps. It's tough on rookie receivers to miss these kind of snaps, Ian. So if we think about, heck, think back to Rashad Perriman and Devontae Parker. That's how they got out of the gate in their careers. Now, I'm not saying that that's what killed them all the way to this time, but, you see a lot of rookie receivers that when they come in, and I think it's more susceptible to this because – it's about, there's so many more moving parts, so the quarterback, A, you get the timing down. Then B, the quarterback's got to basically know your body language. So he knows when you're about to do what, so he can throw the ball, in anticipation. Then you got to get on the same page of, okay, in this option route, when you see this, I'm seeing this, or are you seeing the same thing as me, right? And if those things aren't there, well, guess what? You don't get the ball thrown your way because it turns into an interception. See James Washington with the Steelers. I mean, he's a great downfield receiver, but Ben just never would truly rely on him because when you go watch the film, he would break the route the wrong way. And then you just see Roethlisberger putting his hands up, and that's what that is. And look, again, that's not hate on Washington. He's a young receiver and he could still do some things as well in the league, but that's the kind of thing you're going to be dealing with Denzel Mims. And Rashad Perriman's still new to the team too, who I really like. Perriman's a guy that I draft a lot as well, but I'm with you on Herndon. And in fact, I probably, that's what I love about doing these shows and talking with people. Matt Waldman, had Evan Silva on, our pod here recently. It's just like that iron sharpens iron, because right now, even at PFF, I've got, Chris Herndon as my tight end, and he's in my tier 8, tight end 2 with upside based on a wide range of utilization outcomes. So I've got Irv Smith, Jay Sternberger, Ian Thomas, Blake Jarwin, Chris Herndon, all right there together. But really, based on the news with Mims, the additional things that we keep hearing, I need to move Herndon up, 1 tier, and 2, really my tier that's above that, where I've got Jared Cook, Austin Hooper, Jack Doyle. I think he firmly belongs in that tier right now. So I like the call.
Yeah, man. And again, it's just that ADP, it's free. And, as I was talking before about Brandon Cooks, like there's no way you look at your fantasy draft in December and just, oh no, Chris Herndon in round 15. That's what doomed my team. Take a chance on the guy. He's talented. All the targets could be there. And yeah, even if Denzel Mims does come up, like there's no reason why Herndon can't be a productive number 2 or number 3. It's not sexy in the New York offense with Gase. And I mean, I don't have high expectations for Sam Darnold this year, but he can do enough to make Chris Herndon a fantasy stud. So those are some of our value. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Quick question just for you real quick, Ian, and it's more of a draft strategy question. What is your strategy this year on tight end? Are you basically saying, look, if I can get one of the top 3 guys, I'll do it at the right price. Otherwise you're punting, or do you have are you really liking the idea of waiting? I mean, there's so many guys this year sitting down there in that, 9 to 12 range, of your draft, and I'm talking rounds, if you're in a 12-man, league that and even later. And so I drafted a lot of tight end premiums. So I have to remember that. Right. And a lot of drafts, to your point, those guys are probably in the 12th and 15th rounds. Yeah. So what is your strategy overall?
It's the former, man. If I can get Kittle, Kelsey, Andrews at a reasonable spot, I'm going to do that. I mean, those are the number 1 options in their passing games. Maybe Tyreek passes Kelsey, but with Mahomes there, we're getting the production either way. After that, it's like, okay, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert was, almost target for target with him at the end of last year. Evan Ingram, can he stay healthy? Tyler Higbee, most dangerous splits in fantasy football. Gronk, is he even going to have the snaps? Hunter Henry, new quarterback. Darren Waller, Jason Witten's in town. Noah Fant, new guys there. Mike Gesicki, will he have the same role with Chan Gailey? Jared Cook, crowded offense. Like all those guys that people are reaching on in the middle rounds, they have questions. And okay, not all of them are going to bust or anything, but like these are all viable questions. It's why we don't have, a big 5 or big 6 at tight end. So, while everyone is, spending all offseason wondering if Tyler Higbee deserves to be a number 6 tight end, just fade that group as a whole, man. If you don't get one of the top 3, it's exactly like get Chris Herndon, Jonnu Smith later. Like I'm not taking Hayden Hurst inside the top 10 rounds just because like he could do what Austin Hooper does. There's like 20 tight ends that could do what Austin Hooper did last season. Even the guys you mentioned in the tier that Herndon's currently in, like your Jay Sternberger, Ian Thomas's of the world. I mean, those dudes could produce too, man. Like, are you with me on this? If you can get the top 3, great. If not, let's go get some dudes in rounds 12 and 15.
I am. That's pretty much my strategy. Now, sometimes everybody's on that same strategy to some extent this year. So you'll get what will happen in some drafts. Now, Ingram doesn't. Ingram basically goes right after Waller. But outside of that next group is pretty mixed. So sometimes, one of those players will get pushed down to me at like round 9 or 10. And those are the times when I'll say, fine, I'll take Hunter Henry here, because I don't normally get him and, he's here. That kind of thing. Because it's not a player that I'm necessarily afraid of taking and that I think is a bad player. It's just to your point, I think his range of outcomes is very similar to a lot of the guys that you can get later. Yeah, the percentage chance he's going to hit on his range of outcomes is obviously better, but we can grab 2 of these other guys, or grab one and just be ready to pounce week 1. Don't. That's the thing I would say in tight end this year. If you do wait and you only draft 1, don't be afraid after week 1. You pounce early. As soon as you see the one, right, that's going to be the one, because one of them is going to break out. The only other guy I will say is I've drafted Higbee a couple of times, and the only reason is because he is the one that I do believe, like, he has a legit shot if things broke right. And to your point, it's a coin flip. But he has a legit shot that if it does break right for him, he can end up in the top 3. Yeah. And so there's a legitimate reason there, to go for it. But outside of that, yeah, I don't. And again, on Higbee, it's usually if he falls to like round 7 or 8, that's when I'll consider, what, I'm going to take his upside here. But it's really an upside bet more than anything.
As I said, man, scariest splits in fantasy football only because he was so ungodly good for the last 5 weeks of the year and just, average before then. So, it's a toss up, but yeah, and that's I agree with you on the redraft. Don't be afraid to go get one of these guys after a big week and, just looking at best ball for a second too. I think, if you don't get one of George Kittle, Kelsey, or Mark Andrews, go ahead and get 3 of these guys. You don't have to figure out when they're going to go off. And if you can leave, with a Herndon, a Jonnu Smith, even someone late, if you're not feeling good about the tight end position in best ball, you want to grab a Dawson Knox late. I was talking on our strength of schedule pod a couple week ago or so, where, Dawson Knox, the first 4 weeks of the season, he's set up to absolutely smash if he can get the targets. The whole year, I don't know, but there's at least some upside. And, when I am playing best ball, doing so over at underdog. So make sure you guys want to do some best ball, load up on those late round tight ends, do it at underdog. You can use code PFF after you make your first deposit, get a free entry into their $1 million tournament. So, when Chris Herndon goes out there week 16, puts up, 2 tutties, 90 yards and 7 catches, a 35-point Jets loss, remember where you heard this podcast and go get that $1 million. So those were our values to start off. And just a quick refresher, those were Chris Herndon, Brandin Cooks, James Conner, and Cam Akers. Dwain, I think you got something to get off your chest here, man, because I asked you for two fades, and I got back 5 running backs that you want to talk about. So go ahead.
Yeah, we'll lump them into one. I think what I sent you in the message is I'm fading Le'Veon John Early, which is Le'Veon Bell, Leonard Fournette, David Johnson, and Todd Gurley. And look, this is not hate against the players. Those players are all going to be in line for volume. But if I'm building my team to try to win championships, and I know what the lay of the land looks like, right? And I know how I need to think about my drafts. If I can plan for it, I'm going to avoid them. And so really, quite often, like I said, I'm coming away with a running back, in my first 2 rounds, sometimes 2. And then the other issue you have is opportunity cost, right? So if I come back and I'm staring, at the end of the 3rd at those guys, beginning of the 4th, staring at each one of those players, here's my issue, Ian, is I don't want to pass on Adam Thielen. I don't want to pass on A.J. Brown. Are you kidding me? I don't really want to pass on Odell Beckham Jr., for those guys, because I feel each one of those players has a ceiling in their outcome and a really solid floor as well. And so I just, I like all of those players, so that's really what it comes down to. I don't think that, those players are necessarily going to maybe lose your league for you, but I don't think they're going to win your league for you either. My goal is to crush people, not to just kind of try to win, the best years I've ever had in fantasy football, playing in, a lot of these huge major tournaments. And, I've finished in the top 5 multiple times. I don't make those plays. I'm all about roster construction and balancing things out, but avoiding those types of players has always worked for me. Every once in a while, does someone like a Curtis Martin, when he's like 33, just bust off? You're like, whoa, that was awesome. It happens. It does happen, and if I were to pick one guy out of the group, I would still probably lean, to Gurley. But I just don't see them as being worth enough for me to pass on the receivers that I like taking there. And we already talked about how I feel about Akers, and I can get him 2 to a round and a half later, and I like his upside.
Yeah, it's been, a big narrative throughout this offseason where people are talking about robust RB or your modified 0 RB, which pisses me off because it's not 0 RB, so don't include that in the phrasing of it. But I encourage people, if you have not done your home league draft yet and, you're just kind of trying to catch up real quick, do 1 or 2 mock drafts or do a best ball draft and just look at the RB wide receiver situation in round 4 or 5. Because once the top 15 running backs are gone, you're picking between your Le'Veon Bells, Fournettes, David Johnsons, Melvin Gordons, Gurleys of the world, and you're having to fade your Adam Thielens, your Allen Robinsons, and these top 12 wide receivers that are still there. The running backs are flying off early. You want to get some of those top 15 running backs, but, restrain yourself from reaching on that wide receiver early. Go get your Josh Jacobs, even if, someone like DeAndre Hopkins might be available. This is just, I'm not saying every single draft you need to do that, but I want to come away with 2 or 3 of those top 15 running backs so I don't have to focus on these guys and I can still take the baller receivers available. I'm with you, man. And I do think David Johnson out of this group is the guy I would stick with, just because, when you trade your franchise's most beloved figure for him, I think, we're going to see Bill O'Brien go ahead and just feed David Johnson as many touches as he can get until the wheels fall off. But, definitely a volume play, and I'm not going to be disappointed if I can, get James Conner over Johnson or something along that line. So I heard you say Gurley would be the one guy you might go to. And, man, my one hesitation with Gurley, it's not even before the whole him limping throughout training camp. I think we know he's not the same player as he was a couple years ago, but I'm just not all that convinced he's going to get that, 80% plus snap roll, man. Devontae Freeman was never able to get that. Tevin Coleman was never able to get that. I think we're assuming, a little bit with our Melvin Gordons, with our Gurleys. Maybe I'm even making the mistake with David Johnson. When running backs are changing offenses, we better be pretty sure they're going to be okay, because there's a low floor there for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, they really are just volume plays. And that's not bad. Volume is the number one thing you need. So that's kind of your starting point. But at the same time, again, it's all about opportunity costs. If I was able to get those players 5 or 6 rounds later, I might even build a strategy around certain drafts where I would plan on grabbing one of them. But I just don't want to take them where they go because of, to your point, the receivers that are there. I'm never going to feel good about taking Todd Gurley versus versus Allen Robinson or versus, Adam Thielen or AJ Brown. I'm just not, and I like to feel good coming out of my drafts.
Not trying to feel bad. I'm with you, man. All right. My fade now, Cooper Kupp. And, I was watching some highlights today. Like he had that touchdown, or I'm sorry, he got stopped at the 1-inch line against the Saints last year where he just broke 5 or 6 tackles, like looked like a complete monster. And he was absolutely crushing it last season to start. I mean, the PPR wide receiver 2 in weeks 1 through 8. Then the second half of the season happened, man. And you talked about this before with Higbee, but the Rams really started embracing 12 personnel a whole lot more. And, Kupp slides down to wide receiver 21 in weeks 10 through 17. And just the snap rates, man, were really alarming. I mean, he only played 28% of the offensive snaps in week 14, perfectly healthy, finishes the year with back-to-back performances with just 61% of the snaps. He still had 18 targets in those games. They got him the ball. It's not like he was being ignored, but clearly some, mumbo jumbo stuff was happening there. And it's like we have Devontae Parker like splits. We had a guy who was the number 2 receiver for part of the season and outside the top 20 in the other part. But Kupp, unlike Parker, is still being priced, as like a top 13, 14 guy in a lot of these drafts. So like for me, I'm taking Robert Woods ahead of Kupp every single time because the targets are close, but we can project another 15 to 20 rush attempts for Woods that have not been there for Kupp. I think Woods might just be a little bit better overall. And, once I make that decision now, Woods over Kupp, it's like, why do I want to take Kupp over just undisputed number ones like DJ Chark, Devontae Parker, Cortland Sutton? I have Kupp as my wide receiver 25. Maybe that's low. Maybe this Rams offense can, get back to enabling 2 high-end guys. But, just with their failure to do anything on the offensive line, Cam Akers, I'm okay with taking a chance on because a little bit later in the draft, and he just has a chance to get so much volume that he could make up for the offensive line issues like we saw him do at Florida State. But Kupp, I could see him being that one guy in the offense that, takes a step back this year, not necessarily because he's a worse player in 2020 than he was in 2019 or 2018, but just newer look Rams offense without having Cooks to stretch the field. It would make sense if he's not able to get kind of the same sort of success going. And, had Matt Harmon on his podcast a little earlier in the summer, and, the stat he brought up, I thought was really interesting, where Kupp has never finished above the 12th percentile in success rate versus man or press coverage at any point in his career. Like, again, look, that play he had against the Saints last year was just so incredible. And I'm not saying Kupp's a bad football player by any stretch of the imagination, but if there is a wide receiver in this top 15, top 20, and you look at the list, they are just all complete studs. I think Kupp might be the one guy who is, benefited from scheme and just kind of his coach setting him up more so than the other guys. And I just have questions if that's going to continue in a potentially worse version of the Rams offense in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, we're aligned. I'm not just trying to agree with you. I'm hoping we have something we disagree on. But, I had Cooper Kupp as my number 1 fade at receiver. And again, it's not the player. It's down to what happened down the stretch. When I look at what the Rams offense did when they went to more 12 personnel, and it was after Brandin Cooks started having the concussion issues, and now Brandin Cooks is gone, like the best blueprint I can see right now for how the Rams are going to approach their offense is going to be similar to what we saw at the end of the year. That is also whenever Jared Goff was at his best. Goff splits, if you look at those last 5 weeks, I want to say average about 325 yards a game passing. And before that, it was really pathetic. So that would be with Higbee, so that would be the positive, right? That would be with Higbee, on the field. And when you're in 12, here's the big issue, for Kupp. When they were in 12 personnel last year, Cooper Kupp had 11 snaps in 12. When they were in 11 personnel, Cooper Kupp had more snaps from 11 than any other receiver, on the Rams last season. But when they go to that 12 formation, they actually go to Josh Reynolds. And I think, that's the thing people have to think about is while we are talking fantasy, it still all comes back to football. So Josh Reynolds is a field stretcher. So you always want to have a vertical component, if you can, in your offense on the field. So the defense has to respect that. They have to keep the safety back, depending on down and distance. Cooper Kupp doesn't really create that kind of a situation. The other thing is Cooper Kupp, from a blocking standpoint, he's decent. But, Reynolds is actually, a better blocker. And also having an extra tight end on the field is obviously a way better option, right, than having Cooper Kupp as a blocker. So those are all things that I think, when coaches are getting ready for how do I best deploy, my weapons, they're considering these things. And I think Kupp's still going to have some huge games. In games where the Rams trail and all of a sudden, they're just down 21 points. I think you'll see a ton of 11 in those weeks. Great, use Kupp. What I would say is in DFS and the games where the Rams, are favored, to be like a 7-point underdog this season, those are your weeks. Get ready. Put Cooper Kupp in your lineup. Everybody else will be off of him. You get him in because the 2 weeks before he's done nothing. People are like, I don't know what to do with this guy. So, and I'm also with you on Woods. Woods, if you look at that stretch you talked about, 25% of the targets, to your point, he always gets the rushing attempts and nobody talks about it. You do. You're the person who talks about it. And I mean, he had 17 rushing attempts, in the last, each of the last 2 years, I believe. No, 19 and 17, 272 yards, 2 touchdowns. So for me, Woods is one of those guys that I just love the floor on. And I think he's got a little bit of a sneaky upside, especially because if they're in 12 more and Kupp's off the field, and let's say people think that Everett will be the second tight end in 12. Well, that really wasn't the case. Everett and Higbee didn't have that many plays together last year. It was quite often, Johnny Munt, who's a good run blocker. If that happens all of a sudden because the Rams are trying to make people think, are we running or are we passing? You have to put the pass blocking tight end on the field to make it work. As soon as they see Everett, who's terrible at run blocking, they're like, it's a pass. So it's not as simple as what some people think. And so when you think about that scenario, Ian, if I've got Josh Reynolds, and I've got Johnny Munt, and I've got Tyler Higbee, and I've got Robert Woods on the field. Woods has to be one of the top 2 reads every time. So I'm totally with you on the Robert Woods thing. I love it.
And I mean, look, like you said, Reynolds is taking Cook's spot. We also have Van Jefferson there. And I know, that was one of the most kind of widely mocked picks because not a lot of people had him going that high. But this is a round 2 pick. And, as someone that doesn't, I did not watch just enough college football and film going this year. I've been an XFL, AAF guy. I'll work on that part of my analysis in the future. But, I brought on smart people like, Josh Norris from Rotoworld and NBC Sports to give me, get me caught up on these prospects. And, according to Josh, Van Jefferson does everything that Cooper Kupp does. And, he's kind of that same player. Like Van Jefferson is not there to replace Brandin Cooks. If anything, Van Jefferson could, take away opportunities from Kupp, maybe even from Woods. I think Kupp's could be fine. Again, he's my wide receiver 25, ahead of Tyler Lockett, ahead of Keenan Allen. I'm not predicting the guy is going to bust this year or anything, but to your point, would not expect the same consistent production that we've seen over the past few years. All right. Couple more fades on my end, then we'll do a quick honorable mention round and we will get out of here, everyone. But 2 guys I wanted to bring up that I don't think anyone should be touching are Marlon Mack and Kerryon Johnson. And this is, to your point about your kind of running backs that you want to fade. It's not even these guys in particular. It's just their situations in general where we have 2 teams in Detroit and Indianapolis that in our most recent sample size of these running backs, Detroit was using 4 running backs the last 2 weeks of last season. Indy had 3. And, what has happened to both Mack and Kerryon? They flashed over the years, but every time they get a featured role, they can't stay healthy and their coaching staff has to lean on other guys. I mean, we keep waiting for these dudes to break out, but every single time they're in there, we're still seeing Ty Johnson, Bo Scarborough, Jordan Wilkins, Jonathan Williams, Nyheim Hines. I mean, more or less, average to maybe a little bit above average backs, still, putting their foot down and taking away time from these guys. Now in both offenses, we've got higher round picks and Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift coming in, now the favorite to lead the team in touches. And I'm just looking at Marlon and Kerryon, and it's like, even if in some scenario where Jonathan Taylor and Swift get hurt or they get suspended, they miss time, I don't even think a 3-down roll is awaiting Mack or Kerryon. I mean, they are like not valuable handcuffs or backups. And in some cases, they're being drafted ahead of some of these handcuffs that we'd feel more confident about getting 3-down rolls. I mean, I am taking Latavius Murray, Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, Chase Edmonds. I'm taking them over these guys 8 days of the week. And, one of the hot topics on fantasy Twitter recently has kind of been this discussion about handcuffs. And, and I agree with the idea that you shouldn't draft your specific running backs handcuffs handcuff. And that just means, if you already have Ezekiel Elliott, it's between Tony Pollard and Latavius Murray, draft Latavius Murray, because, there's no scenario where Zeke and Pollard go off in the same season. There is one where Zeke and Latavius Murray do it. So, I understand that to some extent, but that's implying that there's, 30 some handcuffs out there that have 3-down rolls. Like I said, I really only think it's Murray, Pollard, Madison, and Edmonds. Maybe we can make an argument for a few more, but I just want these 3-down handcuffs, period. If you can get Pollard and Murray, the more the merrier. I am staying away from these, early down guys that, if worse goes to worse, we're still only looking at, maybe 15 touches a game, maybe 50% snaps. And we know we've gotten Mack and Kerryon. It's not a 3-down roll. It's likely going to be a committee back. Do you have any interest in these guys this year?
It all comes down to price. I totally get, where you're at with those true 3-down cuffs. And I also agree that, if Jonathan Taylor was to go down, right, Mack I like a little more just because of the situation that he's in, right? He's going to play behind a great offensive line. They want to try to run the ball more. He has, hit 1,000 yards, 2 different seasons. So, and I expect their defense to be better. So I like his situation. To your point, he's not going to be a 3-down back. It'll be Nyheim Hines coming in, and then they'll re-sign Jordan Wilkins, and then use him just enough to really annoy you. And to your point, like Mack last year, because every year I basically do this little, I don't want to call it a study, but I'll just call it a study. I look, okay, which running backs, right, were the most sensitive to game scripts? And Marlon Mack by far was number 1, last year. And it's because, he doesn't get on the field on the passing downs. And so that makes him very susceptible to any time all of a sudden the Colts are down, his game's over. And that's why you see the roller coaster. But he is on a team that has a really good offensive line. So I like him. I don't think I've drafted Kerryon yet. But when I do take Mack, and if I were ever to consider taking Kerryon, it is when they slide past ADP, right? So, like, I think that I've drafted Mack maybe once or twice, but he slid to like the 10th round. Yeah. And I'm like just sitting there staring at it. I'm like, look, I'm going to grab a share, of this because the situation is still good. Yes, he's in a committee, and that's honestly my problem with Jonathan Taylor right now is that, he's in a committee too. And even if Mack goes down, he's also going to be facing, a similar situation where he could be very, very, very susceptible to game scripts. Now, I think he's more talented than Mack. So obviously that gives you, additional upside. And if they were just to dominate and be winning all these games, Jonathan Taylor could win you your league. It's similar like what Derrick Henry did down the stretch last year. All of a sudden, Tennessee wasn't trailing anymore. And guess what? Derrick Henry's staying on the field all the time and they just keep handing him the ball in this super hyper efficient offense. So, I mean, Jonathan Taylor could find himself in that spot. Matt could find himself in that spot. But I am with you, and it's roster construction again. If for whatever reason I've got 4 backs and I'm going around 10 or 11, I'm with you. I'm taking one of the guys that I think can win my league if the other guy goes down. If I'm in a situation where, maybe I've only got, for whatever reason, 2 backs and I'm like, man, I need a bye week, maybe filler and a semi handcuff. Maybe I might lean more towards, a guy like Mack, but again, they have to slide. I'm not taking them, in the 7th or 8th round where I sometimes see them go, but when they slide, I'm willing to, pull the trigger, especially Mack.
A good point on the offensive line, and I was a little lower than I am now on Jonathan Taylor throughout the offseason. I have not changed that because of the training camp vids, but it's just more of a realization that this Colts offensive line, PFF's number 1 offensive line when we released the rankings earlier in July, that helps. It's it's the running back equivalent to almost having if you're a wide receiver, Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. I mean, 200 carries for Jonathan Taylor behind the Colts offensive line. We could say that's almost, equal to 250 carries for Leonard Fournette behind the Jaguars offensive line. So definitely something to consider there. And I hear you, but yeah. 4th or 5th running back, go shoot for the moon, shoot for that upside. Maybe Mack Kerryon can get you a couple okay weeks, but I just think more under almost no scenario this year are you going to see those guys being must starts. So we will see, man. All right. Any honorable mention, values, and fades you want to get off your chest?
Yeah, I mean, I do give David Montgomery an honorable mention, and he's a guy that I avoided like the plague last year. And the only reason, is because if you look at the requirements, for what a running back 1 is from a standpoint of attempts, If you look at it from a standpoint of snaps, if you look at it from a standpoint of, carries inside the 5, he checks all 3 of those criteria. I see his role staying similar. We could see your boy Cordarrelle Patterson work in a little bit more. They've been talking a lot about him, but Cordarrelle Patterson, it's like, I have to see it. I just don't believe in camp hype anymore as much as, and I love that guy coming out too. I remember trying to move the world and earth, just to try to get him in a dynasty draft, and it didn't work out, and I was so bummed. But when I look at David Montgomery, I look at him and I'm like, really, Montgomery is probably very similar to what we're talking about with David Johnson, even Lenny Fournette and some of those other guys, but I can get him in the late fifth round, sometimes the early 6th. So if my requirement is just that I want to know that I'm likely to get the volume, but I don't care if I'm real efficient, then I like Montgomery. The other thing that I try to think about, Ian, is I always try to think about, okay, what are some mistakes I've made in the past? Even though some of them maybe, I'm more of a data and a process guy, but still I think there's room for like this anecdotal kind of evidence. And so the one that always gets me is I remember Le'Veon Bell's rookie year, being excited about him. He didn't really look good. He was overweight, didn't really have, the kind of, quickness to his feet, and the offensive line for the Steelers was a problem that year as well. But for all these reasons, basically, he just didn't do well. And so I basically wrote him off. And I remember the next year he was kind of creeping up in drafts and going in the 3rd, 4th round. And I'm thinking, man, that's just a volume play. That's just a volume play. Week 1, he comes out and he's like just shredded. He's a total different looking body. And they're very similar kind of styles, right? I mean, they're East-West kind of guys. They're quicker than they are fast. And so sometimes you just kind of have to give some of these guys, a benefit of the doubt. The issue for Montgomery versus a guy like Bell, obviously, is you have Tariq Cohen. And he immediately caps, that's the one thing you didn't hear me say, is that he hits, what you want from a routes run or from a target standpoint. He's a decent receiver, but he's capped because Tariq Cohen, is a guy that really, that's how they want to get him involved. So that's a little bit limiting, to David Montgomery. And so Montgomery's not a guy like I'm racing to get, but I do think like that 5th, 6th round price, I'm like, I don't mind owning, a few shares of David Montgomery at the price.
Probably the cheapest back that you can, reasonably expect 250 and more touches from. And, going back 2010, 141 of 150 backs that have gotten at least 250 touches have finished as a top 24 PPR RB. Now, 2019, Dave Montgomery was one of those 9 that didn't hit. But even with Tariq Cohen, man, Tariq just had one of like the least efficient seasons as a high usage receiver that we have ever seen. This dude averaged, I think it was like 4.3 yards per target or something, like just absolutely miserable. So while I do think Tariq, like he's not going to be removed from the offense, it wouldn't be shocking to see Montgomery get some sort of chance for the pass down work, or maybe my guy C-Pat just takes over and becomes the baller that we all know he is, but probably not. A couple more values.
Well, just last year, just real quick. Yeah. Last year, whenever the Bears were leading, Montgomery did stay on the field, and he was actually seeing more of the routes, more of the targets. So it's like when they get into that trail mode, which their defense is pretty good. So there's room, right, for that to improve, as well. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you good. But yeah, so, Dave Montgomery, again, at that price, it's fine. And if you do find yourself in these drafts not getting the early running backs, taking your Devontae Adams or Michael Thomas's of the world, yes, go ahead and scoop up Dave Montgomery. Like, that's not a bad guy to throw in your RB2 or even flex spot more weeks than not. I'm just going to list a few off. I had an article come out on Monday this week where it's just my guys, my top 10 players. And I'll have a fade list coming out Thursday. So, more words on those guys in there. But, you mentioned him before, but Adam Thielen is someone that I'm really high on this year. I think everyone looks at that Stephon Diggs 94 targets from last year. They don't look at Gary Kubiak's whole career, man. His wide receiver 1 has averaged 138 targets per season. You only have to go back to 2018 to find the last time that Thielen was a top 7 fantasy wide receiver. Gardner Minshew, I think, is the premier late round quarterback. The more I go into it, 5th in rushing yards last season. He has that kind of DGAF YOLO ball style that we saw from Ryan Fitzpatrick last year. Underrated chance for Minshew and DJ Chark to kind of be the 2020 version of what we saw from Fitzpatrick and Devontae Parker in 2019. Really like Henry Ruggs. He's starting to creep up the ADP a little more than I would like, but I think, seeing Darren Waller, Jared Cook really dominate over these last 2 years has kind of given this impression that John Gruden's a tight end guy. I don't know, man. You go to 2002, 2008, Joey Galloway, Keyshawn Johnson, Keenan McCardell, Antonio Bryant, Michael Clayton. All these guys had 120-plus target seasons, and that's not even mentioning what Gruden did, with Tim Brown and Jerry Rice in his first stint with the Raiders. So I think he's been waiting to get an alpha wide receiver, and, who's that? I know everyone loves their Bryan Edwards, but, Bryan Edwards was not the first receiver selected in the draft. That was Mr. Henry Ruggs. And then quickly fades, man. Tom Brady, dude, I'm just not taking him. I'm not going out of my way to get him. I have him as a borderline QB. I don't think he's going to crash and burn or anything. But, this is a situation where I think the Buccaneers are going to be much more ball control than we saw from last year. I just don't think it's fair to, assume that Brady's going to be throwing the ball as much as Jameis did. Give me, Breeze, Stafford, Matt Ryan over Brady in terms of just, the similar aging gunslingers, and I'm taking the top 8, mobile quarterbacks over Brady any day of the week. And then finally, Darren Waller and Hayden Hurst. And, we talked about the tight end strategy before, and that's really all it comes down to. There's a scenario where each of these guys balls out, but too much risk for me to devote a top 10 pick to them. And yeah, man, that's going to do it. Any final thoughts?
No, we just finally have our first disagreement. Yeah, Brady for me, I kind of have these trigger points in the draft. Basically, if you get to the 8th and Dak is there, you do it. If you get to the 10th or 11th and Josh Allen is there, you do it. If you miss on both of those and you get to the 12th, 13th round, then Brady is my guy. And I just, when I look at the situation, I totally get the idea around, the chance for them to run the ball more and pass the ball less. But again, when you look at how the team is built, they're really not built to run the ball that well. They don't really have, I don't think they have a great running back on their team, at least as of, I'm not convinced of that right now. The other thing is Arians and Brady have both shown over the history of their careers to be willing to put, the pedal to the metal when it comes to the passing game when they have the weapons. And so I think there's really still a really good chance, that you could see like a 58-42 pass to run split. And in fact, that's where I have them. I would say that's their median. I mean, it could end up 60-40. It could end up like 56-44. But when you look at the weapons, that Brady's got, for me, it's just hard to – because anytime you look back, and I know he's older now, but if you look at any time he's had at least 2 decent weapons, here's what it looks like. So in 2019, he had Edelman and James White, not very good. He was QB 13. The year before that, he had Edelman, White, Gronk, and Josh Gordon. He was QB 12. Again, those are all old. So when I say this, these guys played at least 10 games in the year, right? Yeah. So then you go back to 2016. All he had was Edelman and White. He was QB 19. But then you go to 15. He had Gronk healthy all season. He was QB 3. You have Edelman, Gronk, and Brandon LaFell the next year, QB 9. You have Welker, Brandon Gronkowski, QB 3. Welker, Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, QB 3. Welker, Deion Branch, Hernandez, QB 3. So, and again, I know he's older, but at the same time, you could argue that these are the best weapons he's ever had. And Brady, man, he slides. A lot of people are off of him. So for me, I'm good with it. I'm not worried about his deep ball accuracy. PFF, looks at all that kind of stuff, and he, Brady's deep ball accuracy is fine. If you look at him over 20 yards last year, he's plus 11.5% versus the NFL average. So does he have to anticipate more? He can't just wing it like maybe he used to. Yeah, so it'll be key for him to get in, into a groove, with his receivers. But Brady is definitely kind of, he's sitting right there as like he's a trigger for me. When he makes it to a certain spot, I'm all over it.
All right, that's fair. I'm happy we got at least one disagreement in there. And I'll tell you what, man, I'm seeing, the Buccaneers social media team putting out some Brady to Evans dimes and definitely making me waver a little bit. We'll see what happens as we get closer to week 1. But thanks again for coming on, dude. This was awesome. A lot of good information. Everyone make sure you follow Dwain on Twitter at Dwain McFarland, a.k.a. Context Matters. Nice picture of him looking sharp in a tie and button down over on the old Twitter sphere. I'm Ian Hartitz. Thank you all for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, Tuesday, Thursday shows as early. As always, make sure you check out the team previews. And thank you all for checking in. Until next time.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.